Thank you, and thank you, Harmigan, and thank you to WISE for allowing me to come here and do a presentation on a little bit of my experience in the utility industry for the past 25 years and what we think, or what I think, is going to be coming at us in the future. So I'll get right into it. If there's any questions, put your hands up, let me know. You don't have to really keep them until the end. I do have a couple of spots in the middle of the presentation as well where we can address some questions. So we'll jump right in. Okay, that's a big screen. Here's what we'll talk about. Electricity 101. You guys probably know Ohm's law and a little bit about electricity, so I'll skim over those slides fairly quickly. I wasn't sure what the audience was going to be here today. So Ontario's electric grid, deregulation, which is really over the years added a whole bunch of regulation, but it was called deregulation and it still is. Industry challenges, new opportunities, and future reflection. So a little bit of everything there for the electric utilities and what we're doing. So going way back, 1752, Benjamin Franklin, he did the kite and lightning experiment. You guys are probably all aware, where he decided that lightning was actually electricity. I think that was a result of that one. And there's a whole bunch of history there behind electricity that I think I'm going to skim over because you guys might be more interested in going forward in the long-term energy plan and what's going to come at us in the future. So 1878, the first light bulb, the invention, we've come a long way. Incandescent lights, I'm going to talk about street lighting in cities quickly here. They've lasted about 100 years, and then we went to high-pressure sodium lights around in the 1980s, I think, maybe late 70s. And now we're looking at LED conversions for a lot of cities and municipalities. So the light bulb has come a long way. I'm not quite sure what's next. 1900, Nikola Tesla. I had to put a picture of the car on there. He back in the 1900s looked at AC electricity and making higher voltages and transmission and three-phase power and all that fun stuff. So everybody knows why the birds aren't getting zapped. Again, this presentation, I wasn't sure about the audience, so we're going to race through the beginning part here. Electricity needs a path to ground, needs a return current. A very simple, I think it was first year university when we built one of these generators just to show how you generate electricity from the ground up. And this would be AC because it's a rotating magnet and that's a bunch of coils of wire. So three-phase current, that's a sine wave. I couldn't do an electricity presentation without showing a sine wave. Very basic, but it's lasted. It's been from the early 1900s until today. For power distribution, power transmission, it's the way the system is, and that's what works over time. Changing the voltage from a higher voltage to a lower voltage. Again, you guys are aware you have transformers, cores, and lots of coils of wire to make the voltage go up or down depending on what you want to do. Distribution system, we're getting into my area now. We've got transformer stations or generators. High voltage for us is anything from 4 kV up to 44 kV. For distribution. Waterloo is 27.6, a lot of the distribution. Guelph, it's a lot of 13.8 kV, so there's different systems depending on where you are in Ontario. Ontario is a very big system made up of a whole bunch of little systems, and just because of the history of Ontario and electricity, that's just the way it is. A lot of government influence as well. I'm guessing no questions on Electricity 101? Very good. Ontario's electric grid is the next section here. Again, it's made up of a whole bunch of smaller utilities, but when you look at the transmission system, it's the whole system. This is what it looks like. So we've got generators, large-scale generators, and these are all generators that are connected to the transmission grid. So the big electric towers, Ontario Power Generation, Bruce Power, other smaller ones, they generate most of the electricity for Ontario. Very clean when you compare it to other jurisdictions. We've got a lot of nuclear, a lot of hydropower. So as far as greenhouse gas emissions go, very clean grid. So transmitters, again, you've got Hydro One, Great Lakes Power. Transformer stations over here. We've got 4 in Guelph. Waterloo, I think, has around 4 as well. Owned by Hydro One, and there's one owned by Guelph Hydroelectric Systems that take the power from 230 kV or 115 down to distribution voltages, which will be 13.8 kV or 27.6, or older areas have lower voltages as well. Right down to the distribution lines and then the customer meter. So this piece, this bottom right corner, is the important piece for when we start talking about future stuff. But right now, this is the way the grid works. Very one way. Electricity is generated, electricity is transmitted and distributed, and supplies are load. Another light bulb there. Looks like an incandescent one for customer utilization. So that's the typical Ontario grid. As far as the market goes and regulations, this is just a small taste of what we're looking at for regulations. Generators, again, top left corner, I guess, Ontario Energy Board. They became the regulator for the electric industry. Historically, they regulated the gas industry as well, so they do all energy now. They set the rules. They're who we apply to for our rate approvals every 5 years, and then every year we also do rate applications to the Ontario Energy Board for approvals. So the market, we've got retailers, direct wholesale market participants, IESO, the Independent Electricity System Operator. They run the show as far as where the power goes in the province. So they look after the transmission grid operating, deciding which way the power flows. And also, more recently, they look after all of the renewable energy contracts. So a lot of the FIT and microfit programs, which is feed-in tariff, they're administered by the IESO. And renewable energy contracts typically have been 20-year contracts. So, and distributors, that's us right there, a little guy in the bucket. Customers, again, one-way, two-way communication. The red is kilowatts, kilowatt hours, pretty straightforward. The black is where the money flows, and again, the regulations. So a little bit of a busy slide, but it's way less busy than the other slide I took off of here, which had all of the bodies that we report to, from everything from safety to electricity to driving the trucks. So lots on the plate there for sure. Transmission connected capacity. This is right off the IESO website, so basically shows what our capacity is. You can see 35% nuclear, gas generation 28%, hydro 23%, and then wind and biofuel and solar on the very top, much smaller percentages, and then the megawatts are there. So the overall province has about 36,000 megawatts of connected capacity. So when you look at nuclear, some will say, well, nuclear generates 60-70% of electricity for the grid. Well, that's true when you look at kilowatt hours because they're a flat out running all the time generator. If you look at solar, they don't run all the time, and when you average it out, solar may be 1/7 of what the capacity of a solar panel is. So if you've got a 10 kilowatt microfit installation on your rooftop, on average it'll put out whatever it is, 1.5 kilowatt averaged out all day and night. Go ahead.
What do we do with all the nuclear waste?
Nuclear waste? For me, there has been some articles in the news on where they're going to bring it. I think Hydro One or Ontario Power Generation has a potential site around the Goderich area up by Bruce nuclear plant there, but I don't know what that's going to involve or where it ended up. So. But it's a good question because when you look at greenhouse gas reductions, they get a lot of good credits for not producing greenhouse gas. Well, on the flip side of that, there is waste and there is definitely a potential issue.
I'm going to ask a question as well.
Mm-hmm.
Some of our graduate students, they ask me this question.
Yeah.
I think it's probably in year 2022 or 2024,
yeah.
part of the nuclear generation will go down.
Yes.
So then the portion of gas or natural gas / oil
yeah.
will go up, which
yep.
means the greenhouse gas emissions will go up.
True.
Okay.
But I know the government's intention is to not have the gas emissions go up and hopefully supplement that with renewables. So there's the programs are ending, and you'll see later on in the presentation, but yeah, the intention is not to have more gas generation, but gas is so flexible with starting and stopping the generators that right now we serve all of our peaks with gas generation for the most part. So wind and solar are a little unpredictable, but gas is, you turn it on, you know it's there. So the nuclear stations are running all the time, but reducing capacity because of end of life or refurbishments of nuclear plants, that's probably what that's coming from. That, yeah, they'll try to make up for that in other ways. Energy storage is a big one. I mean, that's, yeah, so. Yep. And then on the bottom end of the grid, which is the distribution system connected generators, we've got about 10%, 3,200 megawatts roughly, and again, that's capacity. So you can see solar is 62% of this 3.5 gigawatts, but because it's only on when the sun's out, it's a lower kilowatt hour production. So these numbers are going to be changing as the years go on, because there's still the last round of large FIT contracts that are going to be connected to the grid. So the solar numbers will keep going up for a little while. But these are the generators that are connected to the distribution grid, which makes things a little more complicated for us as distributors. So that's the electric grid for Ontario, deregulation. And this is maybe not it's exciting for some people, but we'll try to race through it here. I started in the industry in 1992, give or take. In 1995, McDonald report came out. A lot of political influence to say we need to make the electricity system run better. So wholesale competition, at the time it was a very closed monopoly for electricity distribution and generation. So the government at the time said, let's have our generators compete to supply electricity. Let's break up Ontario Hydro, which is what it was called at the time, into a few different companies and have a little bit more competition there. So retail competition was also introduced. The independent electricity system operator was introduced, and the distribution started restructuring. So back then we had 300 plus utilities. It reduced to 90 fairly quickly. Today we're down to about 70, and I think the number is shrinking as we go forward, because there's a lot of incentive for utilities to merge, get bigger, in theory get more efficient, and make the job of the regulator, I mean, this is back in 95, a little easier by dealing with less entities and companies. So 1997, Energy Competition Act, another new bill. There you go, Ontario Hydro split into OPG, Hydro One Transmission, Ontario Electricity Finance Corporation, so that dealt with a lot of the debt from the old Ontario Hydro, and then existing debt assigned to successors, required municipalities to transfer assets of electric utilities to new Ontario Business Corporation Act companies. Back in the early 90s, I was at a different electric distribution utility, and we weren't even sure who owned us. So when it came time to, hey, what do we do with this company? What can we do with this entity? It wasn't sure if it was the province, the people, the municipality. So they had to do a lot of digging to find out that the municipality owns the utilities, and that goes back to that historical element to Ontario's electricity distribution and industry. So that was the decision back then, and now each municipality has either done something with their utility or sold it. You can probably see it in the news every couple of weeks. There's some kind of news release. And in Guelph, we're looking at merging now with a much larger utility. So Ontario Energy Board regulator for all, including distribution utilities. So they set the rates for the IESO, Hydro One, and they started writing the rules for local distribution companies, LDCs, how they deal with their costs and recovery and rates and customer dealings, and the list goes on and on. 2002, more competitive market, perfect timing. They had a hot summer. They had reduced electricity generation. So the rates, when they tried to introduce open rates for kilowatt hour charges and whatnot, it increased the rates big time because of all these other factors. So they, in November, they basically froze the rates again. So back then, people were just really starting to talk about, holy smokes, I should cut my electricity usage during the day because it's so expensive. They capped the rates and kept everything a little more stable for customers and industry. So that was, at the time, the right thing to do. And now, how do you make up the difference? So there's a little bit more regulation coming here. 2004 Electricity Restructuring Act, creation of the Ontario Power Authority, which I'm going to say about a year ago is now part of the IESO, long-term supply of electricity. So they started doing long-term planning a little better for the electric grid in Ontario. Creation of Conservation Bureau to increase energy conservation, and became part of the OPA, again now part of the IESO. Minister of Energy set province-wide targets for conservation. So at the time, they did hand that over to the local distribution companies to meet targets for conservation. So local distribution companies were tasked with talking to customers and promoting programs, everything from LED lights to more efficient electric motors for compressors and whatnot. 2009, this has been the fun one, really promoting green energy. So feed-in tariff programs, so FIT and microfit. FIT is anything larger than 10 kilowatts, microfit is 10 kilowatts or smaller. Those programs have been going strong since 2009, coming to a close now, but there's other things on the horizon to make up for the motivation to go green and go renewable energy. So LDCs, they laid out the rules for distribution companies to connect renewable energy, how to meter it, how to, again, keep track of the costs. The payment for the renewable energy, it was a pass-through to LDC, so the IESO would pay the LDC, LDC would pay the customer. So it's a straight pass-through. Utilities permitted to own and operate renewable energy projects, and we were not allowed to do that previously. So some utilities have put in larger solar installations. Guelph has a 100 kilowatt one on the roof of its office, and that's under one of the 20-year contracts for the FIT program as well. And smart grid development, so starting to lay the groundwork for smart grid. And when we say elements already in place, a lot of utilities are doing system automation at that time as well. So they're just building on that as well. So the last round of new regulations includes a long-term energy plan. So that was put out fairly recently, or I should say updated fairly recently. The current plan looks at affordable and accessible energy. Fair hydro plan, you might have seen that in the news. That's a big hydro price reduction to make hydro more affordable and accessible. Flexible energy system, they're talking there about connecting different generators to the grid and making the grid a little more flexible to connect. Innovating to meet growth. There was a promise made, I think, around the last election for free electric vehicle charging at night. So nighttime is still an issue in Ontario where there's a surplus of generation because it costs quite a bit of money to shut down a nuclear plant. So when they run base load, spring and fall when it's the off season and then it's off peak at night, there's a surplus of energy. So they do have to have negative pricing for some of that energy to get rid of it, as opposed to really turning off and on nuclear plants, which is a whole separate issue. So how do you deal with that? Well, have free hydro at night. Well, that's a little extreme. They are doing pilots through the Ontario Energy Board, and I think it's PowerStream, now Electra, where they're offering a 2 cent per kilowatt hour evening rate, and that will motivate people to either plug in their electric cars at night or use more electricity at night to help with this nighttime low usage problem, surplus generation. So that's a big one. Improving value and performance, again, encouraging consolidation and encouraging better ways of doing things. Commitment to conservation and efficiency, will be more on that later on here. Responding to climate change, this year they started the cap and trade program. I don't know if you've heard of that, but it's the whole goal of it is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So a good motivation for a lot of the green projects that are coming in the future. 7 and 8, supporting First Nation and supporting regional solutions. Those are items that are all part of the long-term plan. And this plan is supposed to be updated annually starting this year. Go ahead.
The 2 cents for the nighttime charging, this means spring and fall?
I believe it's all year, and they do have more information on their website as well. So.
And would companies like Guelph or Waterloo North Hydro try to do this? Because this is a province by problem, right? It's not
it is definitely.
So it should not be an LBC initiative per se.
It probably should be, but right now it's kind of a pilot project. So the Ontario Energy Board has gone to one utility and said, you guys do this pilot, see how it works.
Oh, I see. If it works well, then the whole province.
Then I could see them rolling it out, absolutely, absolutely. But there's a lot of complexities with just things as simple as your billing system. So right now you have 3 time of use buckets for the provincial cost of energy. Well, this would include having different seasons and different time of use buckets depending on which rate structure you pick. So instead of every customer in your territory being on one rate class for residential, now you could have 2 or 3 choices for those residential customers. So it multiplies how many things your billing systems can handle. Over time, I think billing systems will catch up and be upgraded and be able to accommodate more changes, because there's more on that as well with virtual net metering. That's something where multiple loads can be connected to a generator, but it's all done through the financial side of things as opposed to the wires.
in some jurisdictions, customers have a choice of building plans, and they can pick which one they want.
Yep.
And
Yep.
would that ever come to Ontario?
I think at some point it will, and I think that's part of the new, later on, part of the long-term energy plan. That's going to be part of what do they replace these 20-year long-term contracts with, and that's definitely going to be coming. Not quite here yet. Yep.
So like if you have a lot of cars that are going to charge at night,
Yes.
so does Ontario need an upgrade in its transmission system, distribution system, where it works with the current system while a lot of people are charging at night? I'm not talking about in the day because
Yep.
we need more.
I've got more slides on that, but just if you sit tight, definitely. If you can charge them all at night, then you don't really need to build more wires. If you have to charge them all during the day, it's a different story. So yeah, we'll talk more on that coming up. Yeah. Okay. I think we got through all of that one. So back to the main topics here, industry challenges. This one's a fun one for me because I've had some good experience with the utilities and dealing with some of the challenges, including storms. So we'll get right to it. Challenges, I've tried to put it all on one slide here. Cost pressures, that's always a challenge. And I think that's a challenge with every company, every organization, everywhere you go. For us, global adjustment, which is a big part of your electricity bill, is a big challenge because that's the part of the commodity portion. So it's not the distribution portion, but it's the commodity where customers have to pay for that difference in the cost of electricity. And there's a big difference in what the cost is and what the hourly electric price is, because of a lot of these long-term contracts that were put in for renewables. So that's part of it. There's other factors, whether it's how you deal with debt, but that's a big part of it. And customers are really looking at, do I generate my own electricity? And if I do, what's my advantage going to be? And energy storage. Again, we've got companies who are talking to our customers saying, if you put in a 1 megawatt battery energy storage and you charge it at night and discharge it during your peaks, you can really reduce this cost of your global adjustment. And that the paybacks for private projects are actually starting to materialize, assuming nothing changes with the rate structures. So system capacity, always a challenge. You want to connect new load. As you've mentioned, everybody plugs in their cars at the same time during the day, and you have to build bigger systems to handle that added energy demand. Load growth, weather events, aging infrastructure, that's all part of reliability side of that challenge. And technology. Technology is a huge challenge because you've got customers generating, there's one street in Guelph where they've got 2 or 3 net metered homes, and they've got energy storage and lots of solar panels. We put real-time monitoring on the transformer servicing those homes, and we can watch the power during the day when everybody's at work and it's sunny, reverse power flow through the transformers for so many hours during the day. So it's happening now in our systems. In some areas, we're aware of it. In other areas, it just works. So it's definitely a challenge that customers are, jumping on the bandwagon, which is a good thing, but for us, it's a challenge to make sure the grid stays stable, the grid stays safe for people to work on it. So distributed generation, grid defection, there's a couple slides on that, and electric vehicle charging, we'll talk more on that as well. All right, weather extremes. Everyone's aware of maybe a lot of these. 2017, I had to update this slide, and I almost forgot about the hurricane season in 2017. It was all over the news for basically the whole summer. So we're seeing extremes, and they're the new normal. So between 2017, 2016, all of these events going back to Hurricane Hazel, and I put that one on there because my roots are in Mississauga. So I remember being, anyway, I won't give you too much information, but going right through, there's all kinds of weather events that do affect the grid in a big way. This one is a nice shot of an ice storm somewhere between Guelph and Milton, where poles have come down, and ice has really more lately been the big issue for distribution companies. Overhead systems, they're susceptible to ice. New standards are good. New standards allow for a ½ inch of ice on all the wires and 100 km/h wind. So that's kind of a CSA overhead system standard. Great for new builds, but a lot of the old stuff is grandfathered, and this is what could happen. Challenges about aging infrastructure. This is a couple of shots where we hire someone with a good infrared camera, and we go through and take pictures of our whole system. And he finds loose connections before they actually become power calls. So you can see on the left the transformer on the overhead line. On the right, there's one connector that's a little bit loose. So we'll go out, fix that connector before it becomes a problem for the customer. Same thing on the bottom, that's a primary main feeder dip, we call it, and that dip pole has a loose connector on the bottom. That one could cause a big outage to a couple thousand customers if it actually were to become a fault. And that one, like I said, we'll go out, fix it in a planned way so it doesn't impact the customers. Now this one, if I can get the movie to work, you have to really look closely here. Okay, just look in the middle there. There's wood pole, wood hydro pole. There they are. There's some ants that are actually building their home inside the pole. So a customer actually took that shot. It's a Douglas fir pole in Guelph. They have, I don't know where else they use Douglas fir poles, but in Guelph, they're an issue with ants. So we've had to go around and proactively start replacing these poles with the new standard, which for us is Western red cedar poles, which don't have the ant problem that these ones did. So that's a overhead pole movie. And the next one, I guess there's no sound, but this one had some good sound with it. On the underground line, so this is an overhead pole line, and it services an underground subdivision. There's a power problem there, and they're trying to find the problem. So that's okay. It's just the one. Yeah, it's just the one. It sounds like a gunshot anyway if you hear this one. But they are trying to resolve the problem here by sectionalizing a piece of the underground line and then closing in on the fuse. And I just messed that up here, so we'll go back. And I think I can do this. There you go. So you have to keep an eye on the fuse on top there. And so that's what happens when there's a fault on the line and they're trying to find the problem. So distribution systems are still a little bit low tech. They are putting reclosers in some areas, but most of the areas have those and they're just overhead fuses. So if you remember your old fuse panel in your house, if there's a fault, the piece of metal inside the fuse melts and that clears the fault. Well, on the overhead line, because it's high voltage, they have to have a bit of an explosion to clear the fault because the air will ionize and it'll stay connected. So it's a little bit of fun there. That's it. That's it for fun. So if you're here for fun, you can probably head out.
Okay. Since you have so much trouble with the poles, is there a move towards undergrounding?
Yes, there's a lot of areas where every new subdivision, it's all underground now. That's the new standard. For a lot of the main feeder lines out on the main roads, it's still very expensive. It's probably 3 to 6 times the cost of overhead to go underground. You need more room for switching units. You need a lot more underground infrastructure. So for main lines, the standard is still overhead, but where all the smaller areas are, the lower voltage distribution, the standard is underground. So over time, there'll be more underground, but with the cost pressures that we have, we're kind of, okay, if it's an overhead area, we'll keep it overhead unless we're able to find funding to convert it to underground. So
So I have a quick question. When it comes to underground,
yeah.
so what's the average depth below the surface?
I think the electric code requirement is 3 feet of cover.
3 feet.
Yeah, so for main lines, most utilities will bury them in a concrete encased duct bank and have 3 feet of cover on top of it. So, yeah. And this one, storm response. I was very fortunate in my early years there at Guelph Hydro, about 2012, to play a key role in putting together a multi-utility group that went down and helped them with the restoring power on Long Island. So we had about 40 linemen and about 20 trucks, and we drove down there. And I went with the group to help get them set up, but because it was such a mess, I stayed for the duration to help coordinate the work and look after the power restoration. So it was a very interesting almost 2 weeks of 16-hour days and working with the crews. So a lot of problems down there with Hurricane Sandy. The weather was basically warm and then snow, and then with the leaves still on the trees, it just brought all kinds of trees down. Sorry. So we had Center Wellington, which is north of Guelph, Guelph Hydro, Halton Hills Hydro, Kitchener-Wilmot Hydro had a few crews, Orangeville Hydro, and Waterloo North. We had a bunch of crews that went down there. So it was, there's one tree, and one of our underground supervisors, Carl, he's standing beside one of the large trees that was taken down by the hurricane. So trees coming down took down the lines anywhere they found them. So other challenges. LED light bulbs. That's grid defection is I think the key word for that, where customers have been reducing their electricity consumption for years now. The simple analogy of going from incandescent to fluorescent to LED lights, you've probably knocked 90% off your lighting electrical load from your electric bill. So that's a challenge for us, because the less electricity that you use, the less revenue for the electric utility, and then the revenues have to go up, so we have to raise the rates, and then you're going to want to use less electricity again. And some call that the death spiral. So that's what utilities are faced with on the very negative side of the future. On the positive side, there's new opportunities, and we'll get into those as well. Solar panels, the picture on the right is a CHP, combined heat and power, that a large Guelph Hydro customer has put in to offset some of their electric bill under the conservation program, because they're able to use the waste heat and meet the efficiency numbers. Even though they're burning more natural gas, they're actually better off because they're using the waste heat and they're doing it more efficiently. So it's a big part of that conservation program as well. Industry challenges, electric vehicles. Guelph Hydro did put in a charging station at the main mall there, Stone Road Mall in Guelph, as a research pilot to see who uses it, when do they use it, and what's the usage on the electric vehicle charger. So the bottom picture is 2 new chargers that we put in at our office location for employees or the public to use. They're not quite energized yet, but they are there as part of a microgrid installation that we'll get into a little bit more as well. But you can see the statistics there. Since October 2012, the usage has gone up on the charging station to, I think it looks like it's updated till September this year. So definitely a lot of take up when the electricity is free to plug in at the charging station. Electric vehicle take up in Guelph, I think there's about, as of last year, there's about 50 electric vehicles registered with the MTO in Guelph. So out of a population of about, well, I'm going to say the number of customers is say 50,000. It's 50 vehicles, 1 vehicle per 1,000 customers, or maybe 1 vehicle per 2,500 people. So still very low take up on electric vehicles, but that's changing as we get more efficient electric vehicles and more connection points to the grid. So you can see the bottom right is the hourly usage summary. So that's not what we want, because people are plugging in their electric vehicles mostly in the middle of the day when all your heavy industries are running and when you have your highest electric load on the grid. So that's not what we want. But it kind of makes sense because it's at a mall, and at night when the mall is closed, there's going to be nobody there. So the preference and the forecast from the ISO is 80% of the people are going to charge their cars at home at night in their garages. So that's what we're trying to build up for as well. New opportunities. Talk a little bit more about electric vehicles again, because that is a big opportunity as well for utilities if we do it right. Any questions on any of the challenges or anything previous? Very good. We're making good time here. Go ahead.
On your big summary slide for industry challenges, I thought I read load increase.
Mm-hmm.
But the argument with the LED lights is that, okay, in some ways load is decreasing too.
Yes.
Overall, within Guelph Hydro, are you providing more power or less power than you did 10 years ago?
Oh, good question. Guelph has pretty much increased the power that it's provided over the 10 years. Not a lot. In some years it might be 1 or 2%, but there has been load growth. I think the characteristics in Guelph of the customers is there's a lot of industry in Guelph. There's a lot of institutional as well, similar to Waterloo. So and there's a good mix of residential. So with that good mix of load, it has increased slightly. I know of some other utilities where the load has gone down, where they've lost big industry. So depending on where you are, it may be going up, it may be going down. But for us right now, with this year, I think we were pretty much on par. We did set a peak, I believe it was back in June. So our demand is going up a little bit. Some years it's up and down, but being a summer peaking utility, we look for those peaks in the summer when schools are in and when there's a hot day for air conditioners. So in general, yeah, it does increase slightly. And that's what a lot of utilities use to to sustain themselves financially, right? You're allowed to increase your rates a little bit, but you also have to account for increased load growth because that gives you added revenue as well. So.
I see. And from your perspective, do you care if load growth is just being driven by population increase while per capita consumption is going down? Or do you just care about the total amount of power that you're sending and you don't particularly care how many people that's going to?
I think the latter. I think we look at the bigger picture and how many kilowatt hours are we selling to different rate classes. It does matter if it's all residential versus industrial commercial, because that dictates where we need to build new lines and new capacity. But overall, we don't really worry too much about the numbers of people as opposed to the kilowatt hours that are being sold. So, and recognizing that every new house that gets built is more efficient, but most of them also have central air conditioners that go in. So there's a little bit of everything going on. Yeah. Yeah.
So I didn't understand why when the energy consumption from residential consumers decreases, then the price goes up. Because if the demand goes down, then the HOAP also goes down, and you still charge the consumers, again, residential consumers based on time of use. So the profit is still there.
And that, most of that, and I don't want to pass a buck, but most of that is passed through for the province. So as a utility, we pay the hourly electric price. As customers, they pay based on time of use. So that is the commodity portion of the electric bill, and that is a pass through the utility from the province to the customer. So the electric utility on the residential side, they're actually moving towards fixed distribution charges. So if you have a 200 amp service at your house, on the distribution side, it's going to be fixed at whatever the dollars are. And the regulator has asked us to do that, I think, by the end of next year. So we're moving that way for distribution, but for the cost of the generation and the cost of the commodity part of the electricity, that's out of our hands, and that's more dictated by the province. So hopefully that changes as well, where we can start justifying these projects based on saving money on the cost of power. Right? That's overly simplified, but that's something that would be a good thing to shoot for. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay. New opportunities. So here's the fun stuff. We've got FIT program. I'll give you a quick update on that. Net metering, where that's going. Again, these are provincial programs. Conservation, still going strong. Energy storage, distributed generation, microgrids, and cap and trade. So these are kind of the new opportunities where we see work happening right now to make these things go. FIT 5 is the last round of FIT, which again is a large solar, well not large, but greater than 10 kilowatt solar installations. They've had 5 rounds of the program, and it ended this year in September. So they're not accepting new applications for contracts, but they do have a bunch that have yet to be built. So those will still happen. Replacement programs coming. Microfit, less than 10 kilowatts, mostly residential solar installations. That's coming to an end as well in December. So if you're going to build a solar roof, I would hurry up and get the applications in, because that's coming to an end as well. The government has basically confirmed that the long-term 20-year contracts for renewables, that's going to be a thing of the past. So we're going to replace it with something else, and something else is.
What's the current rate for microgrid?
The current rate, it depends on whether it's rooftop or ground mount.
Or rooftop residential?
I can look it up. It started at 81 cents. It's much less now, at 50 something cents maybe per kilowatt hour. Again, that's a guess, but yeah. And yeah, replacement programs coming for renewables. Net metering. So this has been around for a long time, and it basically means you can put solar panels on your roof or a wind generator, something renewable, and get credits for that electricity. So if you're not doing energy storage, which wasn't allowed in the previous program, you could use your electric meter spinning backwards as your energy storage. So if you put in 10 kilowatts of solar, and in the summer you only needed 5 kilowatts, well, you could get credits on your electric bill by having the meter turn backwards. And then the utility, us, we would basically sum it up at the end of 12 months and give you that credit back. So that was the idea behind net metering. This year they've started allowing energy storage to go in with net metering, so you could use more of that energy at your house. And then they're also removing some size limitations, and they're talking about virtual net metering, which there hasn't been any new regulation on that yet, but they were talking about possibly having regulations come out by the end of this year. So that's a big one. Community renewable enabler. So you could put 100 kilowatts of solar panels where you have land and room for it, and you could connect it to the grid at one location through a meter, and then you could service 10 different customers and loads with that renewable energy at other locations. So it's all done virtually with the metering and with the communications on the billing systems, as opposed to actually having to physically connect it to a load, which was the case in the past with wires. So savings in scale, flexibility. There are a couple of pilot projects going on in the province, and this is something that is going to be coming very, very soon. Conservation and demand-side management, CDM going strong. So the latest program is covering us from 2015 to 2020. And again, it's provincial programs to conserve energy with incentives, coupons for LED lights at Home Depot. I don't know if anyone has ever taken advantage of that. Me personally, being a light bulb fanatic, I have. So my whole house is all LED lights now. That's part of the CDM program. So if you buy some lights at Home Depot in Waterloo North Hydro would get the credits for that purchase of lights. So the energy that gets calculated as far as savings go would get credited towards targets that Waterloo North Hydro would have to meet. Same thing in Guelph, same at most other municipal utilities. Again, overly simplified, but the programs are there. And again, everything from light bulbs to air-to-air heat exchangers to more efficient motors. There's provincial incentives there for people to do that behind the meter. And then, going forward, we've also got the Green Ontario Fund. So that's the fund that's coming as a result of the cap and trade program that started this year. So Green Ontario is saying you can reduce your greenhouse gas emissions by having some of this funding towards a project. While greenhouse gas emission reduction in certain areas goes against conservation of electricity, because something like heating your home, it uses a lot or produces a lot of greenhouse gases by burning natural gas in your furnace. Go to an electric furnace. I know we're not going to do that, but that's what the Green Ontario Fund says you can do. So you can burn less natural gas, use electricity at night to heat your home. Great idea, but it kind of contradicts conserving energy at your house. So it's a lot of unknowns right now. It's a transition time, I think. When we get to 2021, which will be the end of the latest conservation program, we'll see if that gets replaced with a new program or something that maybe overlaps with reducing your greenhouse gas emissions. Yep.
I'm trying to understand your statement about conserving energy, because it's conserving energy, it's just not conserving electricity.
Mm-hmm.
It's a difference, right?
Yes.
I mean, it's still conserving energy, presumably.
Yes, yeah. If you're doing it more efficiently, absolutely.
Right.
But for utilities, electric utilities, they measure us by how many kilowatt hours have we saved. So we're reducing our electricity usage. The previous program prior to 2015 looked at demand kilowatts and kilowatt hours. So we got separate targets for each of those.
Right, but I
So-
mean, if I'm your customer,
Mhm.
I put an electric car and electric heating at home because I get the 2 cent kilowatt rate.
Yeah,
That's reducing greenhouse gases, presumably.
absolutely.
I'm not using petrol or gasoline, and I'm not using natural gas.
Yep.
So you're saying you as a utility would be hurt by that?
Not hurt, no, but the programs contradict themselves a little bit. So for us, we wouldn't see any conservation savings because you're using more electricity, but you could get credits for greenhouse gas reductions. So it doesn't really contradict what the utility is trying to do. It's more the programs go against each other a little bit.
And these are both programs from the province.
Yes,
So somebody is not paying attention in the province.
I have no comment on that.
I can say it.
Okay. Yeah, no, like I said, it's a transition time right now. There's a lot happening in the industry to try to see where do we go going forward. So, okay, so positive customer feedback. That's been, and I've got a picture of it, but customers that have put in their own generators under the program, they've had some good success with that for sure. And here's the reference. So the picture on the bottom is an energy storage, thermal energy storage that the University of Guelph put in. So they're saving about 6.5 megawatts off of their electricity bill with the thermal energy storage. So it's basically a good thing for them and their electric bill and for the province. Energy storage, I thought that was a nifty picture, but batteries are getting smaller, batteries are getting more energy dense. So there's going to be a lot happening on that side of things as well. The picture on the right is a flywheel, and that is Temporal Power. They're a company in Mississauga. We've got a proponent who's building a 5 megawatt flywheel energy storage at one of our stations and connecting it to the grid for grid support. So they're basically 10 of those units are going in to produce 5 megawatts of very quick responding energy storage. So batteries are medium time responding, flywheels are quick, other generators are slower, and it's more to support the provincial grid when generators go offline or when demand goes up and down, when solar panels go offline because of a cloud, when the wind stops blowing. A lot of it is to support connecting more renewable energy to the grid. So energy storage is a lot of it going on in the States, and a lot of it is coming to Ontario as well. So distributed generation, another new opportunity. I mentioned behind the meter generators, islanding capable. That's exciting for customers where they can generate their own electricity to save money on their electric bill, and when the power goes out, they can have a backup generator as well. So that's a goal for a lot of customers that are really looking at their own generation. Excuse me. Utility scale, us as utilities, we'd love to connect generators to our distribution system and basically do the same thing. So we could reduce the cost of power, and we could have areas in our system that may be vulnerable to single contingency outages, supported by a big battery, and have 2 or 3 hours worth of ability to run when the grid is down or when there's a big power outage on the system. Load shifting, that's the hourly electric price. Again, that's something that hopefully the regulations shift towards enabling more people to do this to deal with the problem of surplus energy at night and on the off season. Microgrid Research, this is a big one. Canadian Solar in Guelph, they have a big plant in Guelph. They've worked with us to put in a Microgrid Research Center. So it's a Canadian Solar Center, partially funded by the Ministry of Energy. We're hosting it because we had a connection for them, and we had a room on our feeder to add some generation, and they've completed this over the past year. And it's grid simulator systems, solar panel simulators. They've got all kinds of research that they're just starting to do now at the center. They've got the wind generator. I think it's 3 kilowatts of solar panels, and it's an exciting project because they combine. You can see everything on the right there: mini grid control system, photovoltaics, wind turbine flywheels, battery storage, load banks, diesel genset. You see the green thing in the front, that's a diesel generator, grid simulator, solar simulator. So they can take the 3 kilowatts of solar panels and make it act like a 100 kilowatt solar panel to see how it interacts with the grid. And again, wind simulator, same thing, and forecasting on the grid. So lots of fun stuff just starting there, right next to our employee parking lot in Guelph. Again, it's a Canadian Solar project, and they're open to doing tours. I was on one recently, so now that it's all underway and connected, it's an exciting project. A lot of that, I'll go back to that, research is going towards making rural Northern Ontario communities more green on their energy production. Right now they're predominantly diesel generators, and they want to incorporate renewables into those installations as well. So, cap and trade program. This one we could go on and on about, but basically it started in January. A couple cents a liter on your fuel for your car, and a few cents on your natural gas heating bill is what started the funding for this program. And they're basically targeting large emitters, large customers who use a lot of natural gas, getting them to report what they're emitting, and also selling and buying greenhouse gas credits on an auction market that's done, I think it's every quarter, to reduce or incent customers to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. That's kind of program in a nutshell. Green Ontario Fund is what's resulted from it, and grid impacts are always there. We're looking at what impacts do we have by increasing our electrical use, because the electric grid in Ontario is very clean as far as greenhouse gas reductions. I mentioned that before. We've got a lot of nuclear, a lot of hydropower, so that is a good area for reducing greenhouse gas emissions by going electric. And when I started my career 25 years ago, the challenge was, how do we feed more customers from a transformer? Because no one is on electric heat anymore. Back then there was a few houses, maybe 5%, were still using electric heat. They had all converted to gas because gas was much more lower cost and more efficient. Well, now we're going back to, how do we feed less houses from a transformer? Because new building code says you have to have a 40 amp outlet in your garage to charge your electric car. So we're back to people using more electricity, and the big challenge is, how do we do it smartly so we're not increasing that peak right at the transformer in the neighborhood level. So lots of research to be done there as well. Off on a bit of a tangent. Future reflections. How are we doing for time? Doing good? Okay, future reflections. 2 years ago, I was fortunate to attend a conference in Germany, in Hanover, Germany, to look at energy, look at electric transportation, look at all kinds of stuff over there. So I've got a couple of pictures from there, but we're basically quickly talk about what the next generation of utility looks like, future utility, increased energy storage, transactive energy. That's the latest buzzword, where microgrids are enabling people to buy and sell renewable energy without the utility even being involved. Continued greenhouse gas reduction, and hydrogen. I think hydrogen will play a part, as it is overseas, in energy storage and how energy gets used. Utility 3.0, this is, I mentioned one of the early slides, that the important part there for the future, and I've added a couple of arrows going the other direction. So we do have customers backfeeding onto the grid right now, and we are able to deal with that and use it up elsewhere in the grid. But how do we enable that more in the future? The future is just going to be more of that for sure. Utilities are going to be services oriented, so if we can go back to the days, and I know 20 years ago utilities rented electric water heaters. That was one of their side businesses, much like Reliance is for Union Gas renting water heaters. It's, I think we're going to go back to those days to a degree, where utilities will offer customers solutions to power problems. If you want to put in a backup generator, maybe there'll be a device that generates electricity for your house, and we can solve that problem. So things like that, I think, are coming in the very near future. Customer relationships, again, that connection to the customer. I know every month you have to pay a hydro bill, and maybe that's not a positive, but there's things you can do with that to make it more services oriented and more. The Ontario Energy Board is really asking utilities to look after their customers, and they have a lot of metrics that we track to satisfy our customers and how happy are our customers with our service. We're going to be building on that for sure. Community energy, Guelph is one of the first municipalities, I think, that came up excuse me, with an official community energy plan. And that's been in the background for a long time, and that's directed a lot of the work that's happened in Guelph to encourage better usage of energy. And it's right across the board. It's not just electricity, it's gas, it's water, it's everything. Transactive energy enabler, I mentioned that. I've got a slide on the microgrid that's going on in New York. And integrated offerings, so related back to services oriented. What can we do to service our customers? I thought this was a cool slide. We've got Tesla Powerwall 2.0, so more people, I think, are going to be doing energy storage in their basements. It's I'll say cool technology because it's a Tesla thing, but they've really pioneered energy storage with the Powerwall. And now Powerwall 2.0, and their electric cars, which we've seen, and now it's these trucks. Yeah?
Do you know anybody who actually has a Tesla Powerwall?
In Guelph? I don't know any.
Canada.
In Canada, I know.
I tried to buy one.
Okay.
And we've been told that we'll get it someday in the next year or two.
Oh, is that right?
Yes, that's right.
Huh,
We put
okay.
in a $500 deposit
Yeah.
6 months ago, and we still have no ETA.
Huh,
And they're saying we have a few customers in Vermont, there are some in California, and there are 0 in Canada.
okay.
And that's the distributor out of Mississauga telling us this. So I was wondering if they're lying to us, if they actually have customers.
Well, it's a good question then,
They
yeah.
have very nice pictures.
Yeah, yeah.
They seem to have nothing on the ground.
Huh. What's the company in Mississauga? Because there was one company.
It's one of Tesla.ca, the website.
Okay.
It's a distributor in Canada.
Huh. Yeah, no, I was dealing with one in Mississauga, M-Power? But,
Yeah, that's-
or not Mississauga, it might be Toronto.
Yeah, it's somewhere around there. But
Yeah.
I mean, all I'm saying is wondering whether you knew anybody who had a Powerwall or had actually been able to buy one.
Yeah.
They buy one from my lab and they can't.
Okay. No, that's good information. I don't know anybody personally.
Yeah.
I think it's coming in a lot of
I
this.
think they've all been taken in by these nice pictures.
Yeah. And you might, I can't say, but I do know at the show, or at the last couple of trade shows I've been to, excuse me, there's a lot of other manufacturers coming out competing with Tesla.
Yes, one
With-
in Germany, they have some actual stuff that they introduce themselves.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's true. And so I won't say that Walmart and Loblaws are putting deposits down on the big rig trucks. And they're going to be delivered in 2019. So I'll just say that's what the news report says. But similar to the Model 3, there's always challenges, there's always questions. And yeah, I don't know anybody personally that has Powerwall in their homes. But like you said, they make for some nice pictures. And I think if it's not being produced and delivered as quickly as they had hoped, I think it's a good vision of what's coming in the future. So maybe not with that name on it, but there are other companies too. Brooklyn Microgrid. So in Brooklyn, in New York there, they are actually putting solar panels on the tops of these homes, and they're since about 2014. So if I have more information on that. No, I don't. They've been selling renewable energy between neighbors. So they're putting solar panels on their roofs. The company is out of the States. It's a Siemens control system, and they're actually buying and selling energy using not Bitcoin, but I'm losing the blockchain technology. Thank you. So it's a very secure transaction. It's all time stamped. It's all based on when the energy is generated and when it's sold. And that's been happening since about 2014. So the future plan for this, and again, it goes back to energy storage, is to do energy storage with these systems so that we can, during a grid outage, still have power in certain locations. So energy storage, yeah, like I said, if you look at power tools and how much more the batteries have become higher capacity and smaller size, it's just a matter of time. Now, I do have a whole news article on this installation if we're interested. I can look it up or we can move on here. Because the future is including hydrogen. So there you go, generating renewable energy through an electrolyzer to produce hydrogen, put in fuel cells, generate heat and electricity on the back end of that. So I saw a lot of that when I was overseas. Japan, I won't go there yet, but Japan, they've basically, because of the issues that they've had, they're hosting the 2020 Olympics, and their goal is to power the whole Olympic city from hydrogen. So it's the one country that's actually selling more fuel cells that run on natural gas and produce electricity and heat than furnaces for all of their homes that they're building over there. So it's a very interesting way things are going, and I think it's just a matter of time, and they're going to jump over the pond and start putting them in over here as well. This is a picture of a hydrogen Hyundai Tucson and a hydrogen-powered bicycle. And Linde, they're a big company, and they're over here as well. They build the hydrogen filling stations. So they're putting a few in BC and California. I think that's where it's starting here. There's no business case yet financially, but it is, I think it's something that's coming in the future, because if you can generate hydrogen either from a chemical process or using off-grid or renewable energy, you can store it for as long as you need to and use it wherever you need to. So over there, the hydrogen vehicles were prevalent over battery vehicles, because at the show you got to test drive any vehicle you wanted, and because hydrogen is much quicker to fill up is why I think they use fuel cell vehicles there as opposed to batteries. Still a lot of battery vehicles within cities, but if you need to drive between cities in Germany, say, fuel cells is the only way to go. So the German government is putting in, I don't know how many tens or maybe even of hydrogen filling stations on the highways, on the autobahns, and they're going away from EV charging stations. So that's where they're headed. But again, within cities, battery vehicles are still the way to go, and you can see Toyota is jumping on the fuel cell bandwagon. Other companies are saying batteries are the way to go. Say Tesla, maybe that's another one. So see what happens. I think it's going to be interesting, and I think it's all going to play a part in the future of transportation for sure. That's a filling station as well. It's part of the show. Any questions on that? I think we're getting close to the end here. That's it. So, any questions at all? Yep.
So again, about the electric vehicle charging. So you say you have 50,000 customers in Guelph, right?
Yep.
If
Yep.
you have 25,000 electric vehicles, then you can instruct or incentivize the drivers to charge the vehicles at night.
Mm-hmm.
Then you don't need any serious upgrade for the.
Right on. And that's the point. There is a company in Waterloo called Fleet Karma. There's a few utilities that we're looking at. Let's get this black box, put it in every electric vehicle, and have it talk to the grid. So when the grid needs the power, it can hold off on charging the vehicle. The customer would say, I want my car charged by 7 a.m., fully 100% charged, but I'm going to plug it in at 8 p.m. the night before. So it can take all that time to decide when the car's charged. And the theory is if you have 10 houses fed from one transformer, generally we feed them with a 50 kVA transformer. So you have 5 kilowatts of capacity per house, say at the transformer level. You don't want every customer plugging in a 10 kilowatt car charger because you're going to basically overheat the transformer. So you want to do it smartly. So if every car had these boxes talking amongst themselves and amongst the utility grid, you could do it smartly, not have to build any more wires or any bigger transformers. And that would be definitely the way to do it. And some utilities, I think Oakville or Burlington, they are doing pilot projects where they're incenting customers to work with them on installing the EV charger so that they can make it smart and make it talk to the grid and make it happen that way. So a lot of work around that because there is a lot of risk for utilities where if there's a great take up on electric vehicles, if Tesla comes out with the Model 3 and everybody buys one, lots of good questions and lots of ways on how to make it happen and make it happen smartly, if that's a word. Yeah. Other questions? Yeah.
Just curious on your sort of long-term perspective, going back to the early 90s.
Yeah.
The changes since then in the way the electricity system is run in Ontario,
Yeah.
do you think those have been mostly positive changes? Have there been drawbacks? What's your sort of big picture view on those changes?
Well, I'll reference other provinces that have one or two utilities that cover the whole province with generation, transmission, and distribution. They're going through similar pressures with costs and everything else. So I think there's always positives, there's always negatives, but overall, to have 300 some odd utilities in the province didn't make sense. So the fact that most utilities, and I've been more than 5 years at 4 different utilities, we're all doing the same thing. It might be different voltages, it might be slightly different systems, but we're all distributing electricity. So I think it's been a positive for utilities to combine and come together and get efficiencies that way. That's been encouraged by the government for the last 10 years. On some of the other programs, I mean, everybody has an opinion and it gets political very fast. So did they do the right thing by offering the 20-year contracts? They definitely got a good take-up, and they have a lot more solar now than they did in renewables, so that's a positive. How it's impacted the grid, how it's impacted costs, I mean, like I said, there's a lot of different ways to justify things and to explain things, but overall, I mean, I'd say there's more positives than negatives, but that's been my history. Back in the early 90s, it was certain areas were a lot simpler as far as the cost of electricity and where, buying and selling. But yeah, I think where we are now is it's definitely different, and going forward, it's going to change very quickly. The transactive stuff, the blockchain transactions, that's going to be big. I'd like to put solar panels on my roof and sell power to my neighbor without running an extension cord over my fence. And that's to me, that's a very simplified version of what's coming in the future, and it's going to be definitely beneficial as far as greenhouse gas emissions and everything else in the province. So I think we're going in the right direction. Yeah.
First of all, I'd like to thank you for coming here.
Okay.
It's really, very nice to see people from the field in the university.
Mm-hmm.
But my question actually has to do with when we try to work with utilities, LDCs in Ontario, they said that all we're paid for is rates and reliability. We couldn't care less about research. The other R is kind of cut off.
Mhm.
Rates and reliability, there's no money.
Yeah.
There's no time for us to work with universities. And so has that changed? Are you guys actually willing to work with universities? Because many of the problems you talked about, we've been working on for the last 7, 8, 10 years.
Yep.
So we're quite familiar with these.
Absolutely.
Blockchain, there are people who do blockchain.
Yep.
We talk about solar panels, batteries, wind. We have people who understand that pretty well, but we have nobody to talk to.
I think a lot of the medium and small size utilities are constrained, they really are challenged with, if I spend these money or these resources on pure R&D, I may go to my regulator in 5 years with my next rate filing, and those costs that I want to build into the system may get turned down. So now I have to cut back on where I'm building new lines, or I have to save money in other areas. So a lot of that is a challenge for utilities for sure. I think a big benefit to going with, to getting bigger and larger utilities is now you can do some of that stuff, and I won't say on the side, but you have people that can apply to the provincial government for funding for programs. So Guelph did apply for the electric vehicle charging EVCO program in Ontario. We weren't successful, but we applied for funding so we could put a lot more electric vehicle chargers in Guelph. We've also applied for energy storage contracts with the IESO. We weren't successful, but we were there because if the funding came to us, there's a nice project, let's do it, let's make it happen. Other utilities look at these funding programs and say, we don't have the people to put the time to actually applying for these programs. So it is difficult, and it really depends on each utility and the resources they have. So it's a tricky one, but definitely bigger. If you look at the Hydro Ones of the world or the Electras of the world, they're so big that they can go to the Ontario Energy Board and say, look, I want to do this program, what do you think? And have a good influence. If they're servicing 25% of the customers in Ontario, that's a big voice as opposed to smaller utilities that maybe serve 1% or 0.5%. So it's, yeah, I'm sorry I'm rambling and maybe bouncing a little bit on you, but each utility has its own constraints, for sure.
So you're basically saying small companies too don't have the time or the money.
Well, it's a very general statement. Some small companies react more quickly to changes, and they're able to do things like system automation and incorporating things into the grid. So it's a balancing act for sure. I mean, some people think 10 or 12 utilities in the province is the right number. Others think 1 or 2 is the right number, and still more think 50 or 100 is the right number. So utilities have been very focused on their communities. They've been very focused on their own ability to do or not do things. And I think that's, you know, every utility has political pressures based on the ownership of the utilities and now the regulations from the province. So yeah, I can't say that one thing is better for all utilities or that we're not smaller is worse. It depends. It depends. And I'm sorry I'm not answering the question directly, but it is what it is.
More questions? Go ahead.
So you say like in Ontario, if you want to invest in wind power or solar power, then you get this feed-in tariff, so it becomes a profitable investment.
Right, to give you
about energy storage, is it going to, do we need incentives in Ontario so people start building energy storage systems, or do you think it's going to happen in the future, like the government giving incentives to energy storage investments?
I hope the government in the future allows for energy storage as an alternative to a wire solution. So you see it more in the States where if there's an island or there's a place that needs power and you have to spend millions of dollars on new lines and generators to supply that island of power, energy storage could become an alternative where, you know, the power might be required for 6 hours during the day, but at night they don't need it. Well, put in a few megawatts of batteries, that'll give you the power and it'll give you some backup power. And it might be more expensive than building the lines, or it might be cheaper than building new lines. So the regulators, I know a lot of the forward-thinking ones are allowing that as a wires alternative. But for us, again, my hope is yes, the Ontario Energy Board will look at each project and say, is there a non-wires alternative to this? Or a non-generator alternative?
Is it the same for like
The prices are all different, I think, depending on the time of day and depending on, what they're doing with it and the conditions in the province of generators. If generators are offline for maintenance, the price goes up because there's not as much capacity on the province. So a lot of it depends on what's going on with the rest of the province. So it's, yeah, there's definitely complexities there.
So ladies and gentlemen, before we end our session, I would assure you that Erik will be here for the next 5 to 7 minutes to do a face-to-face discussion with you guys, and then we have to leave for lunch. So Erik, thank you so much for your wonderful presentation and sharing some wonderful insights with us. On behalf of WISE, University of Waterloo, and the entire audience, thank you so much.
Thank you. All right. Thank you.